Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today we are just definitely going to do a chill list video because I want like this end of year content just to be calming. It is the new year. Some people are panicking that it's the new year. I just want to make this like a super calm video. I'm wearing my pajamas still, which is really not that much of a surprise if you watch any of these videos on my channel. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about the most disappointing books this year because I just kind of want to get it over with. I've already talked about my worst books if you want to go check that video out. This is more books that just I had such high expectations for. A lot of these are like 5-star predictions or me thinking they're gonna get 4 stars. I loved the first book or the series and then didn't like this. And I don't necessarily have to dislike the book. There are a couple 4 stars on here. It definitely just has to be disappointing compared to what I thought it would be. I originally was going to put disappointing and surprising books in the same video, but yeah, that video would be way too long based on how long my worst video was. So I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to make a video that's like 3 hours long. But yeah, I guess let's just get into honorable mention. This list specifically actually is in order. My surprising list is not, but we'll get to that when I actually film that. But yeah, this disappointing book video is legitimately in order. I also don't have a lot of the books, so we're just gonna be popping them up. I'm not gonna be holding them up. But yeah, so let's start with the honorable mentions. I have quite a few honorable mentions. We're not gonna go through them like as much because I want to save that for the top 10. So first of all, we have one that I read recently, and that is Someone You Can Build a Nest In. I gave this a 3 star, so I mean, I enjoyed it somewhat, but my expectations were through the roof with how much everybody like loved this book. I specifically read it because I saw part of the Gavin, Gabby, and Kitty Coulson video collab thing. I watched the middle of the night one, and then when this one came out, I was like, oh crap, I need to read the book first because they all love it and they're all having a great time, and I've heard amazing things about this book. So I ended up going out and buying it, and honestly, it just did not live up to the hype. And for me, it was personally I did not like the writing. I didn't feel connected to the characters, and I thought the idea was really fun about this human eating monster kind of thing falling in love. And I love that idea. I think the execution wasn't bad, but it more felt like almost a cozy fantasy, and there lies our problem. We have figured out this year that I am not a cozy fantasy fan. Like, it is very rare for me to really like a cozy fantasy. Emily Wilde's and The Spell Shop are the only two, and The Spell Shop still was like a lower 4 star. So because of that, I feel like nothing really happened in this. I was detached from the characters. I was not a fan, but I liked it enough for it to not, like, it was disappointing, but it was not as disappointing as the ones that are on this list. The next is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I gave it a 4 star. It's a very light 4 star, but I loved the ending of this, and that's actually what bumped it up. And I liked the general idea of this one, but it was not, to me, up to Leigh Bardugo's, like, Ninth House, that type of level. I feel like it took a step down from how good Ninth House is and how good Six of Crows is. It just did not have the great world building or writing that her other books have. Like, I feel like it was more close to like I don't like the original Shadow and Bone series. It's not for me. I also am like iffy on King of Scars, but for me that's just because the series has gone on too long and there's just like it's getting convoluted. But this just felt like it just wasn't really well written, and it was still enjoyable for me, but it wasn't up to the Leigh Bardugo standard that I'm expecting. Next up is another 4-star book, and that is Wisteria. This was weird. This was weird. This one is tempting to put on the top 10, but there's just so many other ones that I was way more disappointed in. And this one was on the disappointed list because the point of view change, really. That's what it really is about. Adeline Grace is kind of on my shit list because I don't think she knows how to finish a series. I read her series before this. What was it? All the Stars and Teeth, I think, was the duology. And that was one of the worst endings of a duology I've ever read. I immediately unhauled my books after I finished reading it. And so when I got to Wisteria, I was nervous. And then when I realized she basically cut out our main character from the first 2 books and was just following the new character from book 2, I was like, what are you doing? You didn't wrap up the previous character's storyline. So we had this like huge cliffhanger about our previous character's storyline, and it was like basically the end of the book was like, oh, and they figured it out. And I was like, what? Like, what? So apparently, while Wisteria is going on, our main characters from the first 2 books are like off on an adventure doing things, and I wanted to follow that. I wanted to follow that, not the new character. So it was still great. That's the thing. It was still great, but this should have been its own series. Like, finish up the trilogy with the original characters and then have this new character have her own trilogy, because her book was also super rushed. Like, it did not have the emotional impact it should have had, because it has such a good backstory and build up, but because you basically shoved her entire story into one book, it didn't work. It didn't work with the romance and stuff like that. Next up is The Starling House. I was just really expecting to love this book. Like, the premise is literally everything that I love. A sentient house, and there's monster hunting basically, and you have like a Beauty and the Beast-esque retelling. It should be everything that I love, and it just fell so flat. This was a 3-star. I just could not care less what happened in the book. I don't remember a lot of stuff that happened in the book, and this was definitely on one of my like most anticipated 5-star prediction kind of things. So highly disappointed in that one, and I like felt lost for a couple days after reading that one. And then the final honorable mention is An Academy for Liars, which I'm so glad I am not the only one who did not like this. It seems like nobody liked it. Not a single video I've watched about this book, and no one liked it. I loved House of Hunger, so I was so excited because I read House of Hunger earlier this year. I had a great horror reading year. And so after I read House of Hunger, I was like, yes, let me get my hands on Academy for Liars. It's an Evernight pick. This is gonna be so awesome. And so I got it, and it was awful. It was awful. The writing wasn't even close to how good it was in House of Hunger. The story wasn't compelling. The characters were boring. It was just an absolute utter mess. And if I had finished the book, because I did DNF it, if I had finished the book, it would have been on probably my worst list of the year, because it was that bad. So I was not a fan of that one. But yeah, that is the honorable mention. So now we're getting into the actual top 10, which is crazy. Like, these are real disappointing books. So in number 10, we have the entire Crescent City series. I read all 3 books, I think, in 2024. It feels like 2024 was split into 2, because I was in my old house, and then I had a major health setback, and then we moved to a new place. So it just feels like 2024 took place over like 4 years. Like, most people were like, oh my god, 2024 went by so fast, and I'm sitting there like, this year literally took eons. I have felt like I've been in 2024 for a millennia. So for me, I'm like trying to remember. I'm like, I think I read the first Crescent City earlier this year, so I think I did. But yeah, so I read all 3 this year, I believe, and this was a bummer of a series. This was such a bad series compared to all of her other books that she's written, and I'm including A Court of Silver Flames. I actually loved A Court of Silver Flames. I do think it was too long. I do think there were way too many sex scenes. That would also probably be on most disappointing, even though I still gave it a 5-star when I read it, which is kind of funny to think about. It is both the most disappointing and one of my favorite books. I don't know how that works. But Crescent City is just, especially it's funny because the first one, I think I gave it 3.5. I think they all are basically 3.5 except for the second book. The second book is like a 2.5, a 3. I really hated the second book and how much it dragged and how much it almost felt like it didn't need to exist. I almost felt like you could have had book 1 and book 3 and completely cut out book 2 because it had so much useless things in it. And then book 3 turned into this weird sci-fi extravaganza at the end. I don't know what was going on with that ending. Was it compellingly readable? Yes. Is that why it's not on the worst books? Yes, because I actually really enjoyed the last book, at least. The second book was a slog, still read it. First book to me was mostly a slog, still read it, and I still somewhat enjoyed it. I don't know like what kind of weird hold Sarah J Maas has over my brain, but for some reason I can't stop enjoying and reading her books even when I'm still disappointed in them. Next up, we have one that's gonna break people's hearts. It is coming in at number 9, and it is The Raven Boys. I had such high expectations for this book because you guys know, I mean, it's like basically like a classic now almost, where everyone has read it and it's inspired a lot of other things, and the vibes are immaculate, but I just didn't like the writing, and I think it's more of a Maggie Stiefvater problem. I don't remember how to say her name, but it's I just don't like her writing because I also didn't like the Shiver series, and I also gave up on that one when I was younger too. So I think I just am not a fan of her writing. I am going to attempt Dream Thieves, but I'm not excited about it. Next up we have a DNF, and this is, what is it called? The Davenport's More Than This. It is the second book in the Davenport series. I did DNF it, and I'm so sad because the Davenports was one of my like shocking books of last year because I went into it with zero expectations and I thought it was such a fun book. And unfortunately, this one dove more into the historical side of the series, and I'm just not a fan of historical fiction. So for me, I just wasn't a fan. I also didn't like where we went with the romances. Like, I liked how the first book ended, and I feel like we just like didn't do much with how the first book ended and kind of jumped right into the story, kind of already resolving some of it and not resolving some of the other things. Like, it was the stuff that was resolved, I wanted it to kind of play out more, and the stuff that wasn't resolved, I was like, this needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. So I think I read like 150 pages or something. And it was just, for me, it was just such a slog to get through compared to the first book that I just wasn't interested in anymore, which is really sad because, again, I really enjoyed the first book. Next up at number 7 is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, another one that I rated 3 stars. I didn't continue in this series either. I don't see anything special about this book. I feel like that's a crazy take with how many people love this, but I don't like it. Like, I legitimately thought it was kind of boring and really just kind of absurd. And our main character, Pippa, was so annoying. I wanted to shake her and just be like, stop what you are doing at so many points in this book. Also, I thought the end was kind of obvious. Like, it did have like kind of a bait and switch moment that I was like, okay, that's fine. But generally it was like, it thought it was really doing something with that ending, and I clocked that so early based on how the characters were talking. It's just one of those classic, like, if you really pay attention to how the characters are interacting, it is the suspect that you least suspect. That's how all these books end up being, I feel like, is it is always the person that's like, oh, it can't be them, and it's them. It's them. And when it's them, it disappoints me. So if they had switched that up, I would have been like, wow. And I could have seen it, but just the rest of the story, I just thought it was really boring. And yes, I did listen to it on audiobook, and that did not help the experience for me. Actually, it did help the experience. I don't know if I would have gotten through the book if not for the audiobook. But yeah, for me, it was just really boring. Coming in at number 6 is I think I gave it a 3.25? 3.25 or 3.5, is What Feasts at Night. This is the second book in the little novella series. What was the first one called? I don't remember what the first one was called, but it's by T. Kingfisher. I really liked the first book. I gave it 3.75. I like the gothic style of it. I still enjoyed this one, but I think it should have been 50 to 100 pages longer. It was actually too short for the contents within the book. I just wanted more because I actually really, really liked the book. It just left much to be wanted. So I was disappointed because this was one of my highly anticipated books of 2024, and it just, my stomach is growling so loudly, and it just did not live up to like how high my expectations were, and it just needed to be a little bit longer. Like, novellas can be a little bit longer than what this one was. It just needed more exploration of this world before it really got into the horror. I think that would have made the impact significantly more, and I think it would have made it a lot scarier. So I still enjoyed this one, but I am disappointed with how it was kind of executed. Ooh, number 5 I think is also on my worst list. I think it might have been honorable mention, Hearts That Cut. This was terrible. This was actually a really bad book. This is legitimately one of the bad books on the list. I think everything from, no. The next book up is a good book, but I was disappointed. Everything else is a bad book at this point, except for the one. This is following Threads That Bind, which I actually really loved. It was one of our book club picks, I think last year. I don't remember if it was 2023 or 2024. It was one of them. I loved it. I gave it a 4.5. I thought it was so fun. The magic system was so unique, so interesting. I loved, like, the plot was just like constantly moving. We had this really awesome goal. And then the ending I was a little suspect of. I love how it ended for the book, but I was nervous for the ending for the duology as a whole. Apparently I was correct about that because I really did not like where the second book took the world. I don't like what the characters were doing. There was a lot of traveling stuff, and you know me, I don't love travel in books. And I feel like just all of the interesting things that happened in the first book were completely cut off in the second book, and there was a lot of like bouncing back and forth of just repeating a bunch of things. And it was just generally a slog, and I was so disappointed because I love unique books, and this was definitely a unique fantasy book, and the second book just totally let it down. Next up at number 4 is the book that is good, but it is not as good as it should be. I wish the author would rewrite this one. The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling, I think. This is the third book in the like X-Hex series thing, or the Kiss Curse or whatever. I don't remember which one's first. I love the first 2 books. The first 2 books are 5 stars. I actually gave the second one a higher 5-star than the first one, which is like opposite of everybody else. But I love this series. This is like my favorite romance series. And this third book took such a swerve from the first 2 that it doesn't even belong in the same universe, which is so disappointing. The point of these books is it takes place in this like, what is it, Penn's Hollow? It's like this tiny like almost Gilmore Girls town, and they're little witches, and it takes place on Halloween. So there's Halloweeny things, and they're trying to break the curse and do cute things and Halloween things, and it's just, they're so adorable. So the first one was like second chance romance, which I normally don't love, but I loved it, and it had to do with a witch accidentally putting a curse on one of her like ex-boyfriends. So good. It's so good, and it all takes place in the tiny town. And then the second one is the cousin of the girl in the first book, and she opens up a store, and the brother of the guy in the first book opens up a store next to her, so it's like rival stores, and it's so cute. And again, takes place at Halloween. And then we have the third book, which is a totally unrelated female character, which I was kind of grumpy about. I was hoping there was like another cousin or something. So we already got rid of that thing. It doesn't take place in Penn's Hollow, which is a crime. It is actually a crime. So we got rid of that. And then we have the third brother, who is nothing like the first 2 brothers. He is not my type of romantic interest. He's more of like a mountain man kind of thing, kind of character. Very, very grumpy to the point of kind of annoying me. So I didn't love him either. So we took away literally everything that I loved about these books, and then also added time travel, which is like one of my least favorite things, but ended up being the best part of the book because it was the only interesting thing that was happening. Didn't feel the romance, didn't feel the characters. I still gave it a 3-star, but it was such a major disappointment for what the rest of the series was. Ooh, next up. Okay, these next 3 are legitimately bad books. So coming in at number 3 for most disappointing is Spectacular. This, I gave a 2.5. So it didn't make my worst list because my worst list had significantly worse books, but it was bad. Spectacular was rough, and I've been waiting for this book since it was announced, so this was insanely disappointing. It was like a weird dark romance, and there was like some suspicious consent issues in this because we weren't privy to a conversation that had happened like months ago, so we didn't know what was going on, which was like the point. But because of that, it led to like, again, dubious consent issues and kidnapping things. And I was sitting there going, what am I reading? Like, literally, what am I actually reading? This is kind of alarming. And then at the end, like, you find out things and you're like, oh, but it still feels weird. It still feels kind of icky. Like, I feel gross. And so it was like boring and a weird dark romance, and just, it was weird. It was weird. It wasn't anything like the rest of the books that Stephanie Garber has written, like any of them. We also didn't have any Once Upon a Broken Heart mentioned like at all. Like there was a little teaser that makes us think we're going to have another novella like this that's going to take place in like the summer in the Great North. So that probably will have to do with Jax, and I can never remember her name, but it might have them in it because it did hint at that. But I don't know if I want to read it because this one was so weird. So that was a major letdown. Coming at number 2 for most disappointing books is Vilest Things by Chloe Gong. I never thought Chloe Gong would be on one of these lists. It makes me so sad. But this was arguably trash. I give it 2 stars. It's probably a 1 star. It probably should have been on my worst books list, but I didn't want to think about it. This is the follow-up to the Immortal Longings book, which I feel like I've been proven wrong about that series because I loved the first one. Gave the first one a 4 star. It was so good. Nobody else liked it. It was one of our book club picks for 2023. nobody liked it except for me. And I was like, that's a bummer. That is a bummer, but I loved it. It was such a cool mix of like fantasy, sci-fi, Hunger Games, Death Trials. I mean, it had everything and it lost royalty. It was crazy. I ate that shit up. I loved the romance. Pretty much everything that I loved about the first book, Vilest Things came in and destroyed. I mean, wrecked, because it was so bad. It was so bad. Vilest Things is like, it's like Chloe Gong had no idea what to do. Like, no idea what to do. I cannot tell you half of the things that happened in this book because they made no sense. It was so abstract. Some of the ideas were just so bizarre, and there was so much like body jumping that it was hard to keep track of what was going on. And pretty much every part that I didn't like in Immortal Longings that made it a 4-star instead of a 5 were what was focused on in Vilest Things, and the romance was completely non-existent. They destroy the romance as well, which was super disappointing because by the time the romance kind of kicked back up in the second book, it was dead. It was dead. I mean, it was dead. Like, their relationship was a dead fish. It just ruined everything. It ruined everything. I was so disappointed. And I'm actually probably not reading the third book because I still don't understand what happened in the second book, and I'm not rereading the second book. So most likely I am DNFing that trilogy, which is depressing. Then we have number one. Number one actually was a DNF, but I read like 60% of it. It was before I quit. I was trying so hard to like this book. But this is Fang Fiction. The previous book by this author, I gave a 5-star. One to watch, I think. I adored that book. Fang Fiction is one of the most confusing, bizarre, poorly plotted, poorly written books that I've ever read. It would be on my worst list if I finished it. I don't like putting DNFs on worst lists, but obviously this is more of a space for DNFs than the worst list. So yeah, this was bizarre. I don't even like know how to tell you what this is about. It has such a cool premise, and actually the first 20% of the book was a 5-star. I thought it was my favorite book of the year. That's how much I loved it. And then it like dove off a cliff. It was crazy, the pivot that this book took. So it's taking place in, I think it's in New York or it's in some city. I think it's New York. And we're following a main character who's obsessed with these books that are very similar to like the True Blood books, but make them more Regency romance-esque, I feel like. But it's like vampires and all these types of different things. And it's about 2 vampire clans fighting and how they used to live in the real world. And so she's obsessed with these books, like line for line can repeat them, and is like in love with one of the characters. And so where this book is like really cool is that she actually meets one of them from the book, and it turns out that the book series is real, but stuff is written in an incorrect way. And it's such a cool idea. And so when we're in New York, it's amazing, or wherever we are. I think it's New York, but I don't know if I planted that in my head. So wherever we are, we're in the real world. I loved it. I thought it was so fun teaching them like things that are like not in their world, and it's just so much fun. But then the book pivots and the vampire stays in the real world, but our main character goes to their world, and it's bizarre. It is so it turns into like a cartoon. Like, it gets so cheesy. It literally turns into like a Regency book where it's like, oh, I love you, darling, like stuff like that. And it was like, what just happened? Like, is this on purpose? Like it didn't feel on purpose, which is why it was gonna get a 1-star. But I could not make it through the book. And then the vampire in the real world was actually kind of interesting because it was like a sapphic romance between her friend and the vampire, because the friend ended up having to take care of the vampire. And but it was an awful toxic relationship, and that's what started ruining it. Like, the vampire was like literally gaslighting her into doing things, and it was supposed to be cute, and I was like, no, this isn't cute. This actually is awful. So this definitely was my most disappointed because, number one, I had high expectations for it to begin with because I gave the previous book a 5-star, and that was their debut. I gave their debut a 5-star, which is crazy. And then this book was supposed to be like about vampire books, and I was like, oh cool, True Blood things. I love those books. This is so fun. It's gonna feel awesome. And so I was really hyped about the premise. And then I was so hyped because the first 20% was 5 stars, favorite book of the year. And then it was like one moment everything was amazing, and then the next moment it was ass. It was so bad. So definitely most disappointing book of 2024. That book will live in infamy in my brain because of how bad it was. And it just got worse. Like, I skimmed the rest of the book and it only got worse. So yeah, I'm real glad I DNF'd it. I'm really sad about it. I will try another book by this author, but I am depressed because the idea behind this book was just so good, and now I don't have that book. I don't have that book that I feel like was promised to me, which is why it was so disappointing. So anyway, that was my most disappointing list of 2024. I feel like this got just almost as heated as the worst books of 2024. Probably not as heated with that final book and the worst books. But yeah, I'm excited to now move on to most surprising and my best books of 2024. I kind of wanted to get these out of the way, just film these because they are depressing. So now I can move on to happy things and make me happy while I talk about them. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like it if you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future content and these other videos. Like, I'm literally looking at the books for these other videos. Definitely leave a comment down below about what your most disappointing books were for 2024 and if you read any on these lists. Hope you guys enjoyed some of these more than I did. Yeah, that is everything I have for you today, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in the next video.